Night gathers with gentle hands, laying its cool palms on roofs and roadways, smoothing the wrinkles of the day. The old city receives that touch the way a veteran cloak receives rain, without surprise, without impatience, with the good manners of something well used and still serviceable. Slowly, one by one, windows dim and shutters kiss their frames. Eaves murmur to gutters. Downspouts make their patient, hollow syllables. In these small, drowsy negotiations between wood and water, you can hear the town deciding to rest. A high tower, no taller than a merchant's pride, no shorter than a bishop's caution, keeps a lamp. Its wick is trimmed close, a shy flame behind horn panes. The light does not try to rule the square. It simply announces that someone is awake who means no harm. Below, the stone flags keep the day's warmth like old dogs who will not move from the hearth just because the fire has dwindled. A broom leans inside a doorway. Its bristles carry a little of the market's gossip, a few crumbs of baker's generosity. The sweep will finish in the morning, not because the night asked for neatness, but because neatness helps the morning keep its promises. We will take our time here. We will walk streets that know the souls of their citizens by heart and will not tell on them. We will let the lantern's circle be our punctuation and the city's quiet our line breaks. No chase will disturb us. No loud boast will tilt the air. This is not a tale of clamor. This is the soft account a place gives of itself when the lids are drawn and the soup has given up its last comfort. The river reaches the town the way old friends reach hands across a table. It has brought timber and stories and fish with silver opinions. It has carried away planks and vows and postscripts. Tonight it travels in a low voice, shoulders sloped with contentment, talking to mooring posts with the long patience of water. Boats answer inwood, creaks and small knocks, the grammar of rope, the soft complaint of leather wrappings on or handles. Tar keeps its black promises along the quay. Nets breathe the faint salt of old tides and the grass sweet of reed beds upstream. There is a watch, of course. A city without a watch would forget itself the way a candle forgets it is a candle if no one asks it to glow. The men and women of the watch do not stride. They keep a pace that the hour can walk beside without feeling hurried. Pike iron tap stone, tap, tap. A heartbeat that does not belong to blood. Some wear wool gloves. Some tuck bare hands into sleeves between intersections. Each mouth knows the shape of the whistle that will not be used tonight. Each pair of shoulders knows the corners where a gust likes to sit and bother the hat. They are not hunters. They are shepherds of darkness, and their flock is silence. In the butcher's lane, a cat looks through a gap beneath a door and finds the warmth of the day asleep on the threshold. She settles upon it with a sigh so gentle the dust does not wake. Opposite, a tallow maker's shop holds the fat scent of usefulness. Upstairs, a cradle makes the ocean's motion against a knee, and a small hand, rebellious in its dreaming, taps the air with the certainty that milk explains everything. Timber-framed houses lean a little as if leaning improves their hearing. Their beams, oak that has signed treaties with time, carry the flavors of centuries. Peat smoke that told winter it could be endured, summer steams from kettles of berries, vinegar for pickles, ale's yeast rising like a promise, and the aromatic arithmetic of spices the city only half believes in but repeats because repeating keeps trade awake. The plaster between beams holds thumbprints from neighbors long buried. The way bread holds warmth after a door has been shut. The market square, emptied of bargaining, looks like a stage when the audience has gone and the props have remembered they are only props. Stalls crouch, their awnings rolled into sleeping snails. The fountain in the center keeps its hands to itself, dribbling a little to assure the night that movement still exists. Pigeons, those patient accountants of grain, have tucked their heads into their feathers and filed their ledgers beneath their wings. The moon will audit nothing. The stars will ask no questions. Here and there, the air notes a profession. The weaver's quarter smells of lanolin, lye, and the shy sweetness of drying wool. In the tanner's ward, the river's old truths are rehearsed in vats and hides. Near the smithy, iron keeps the memory of heat the way a book keeps the memory of a story after you shut it. No longer bright, but still entirely itself if asked. The baker's ovens have been banked, but the bricks, proud of their night shift, give off a steadiness that cannot help but encourage sleep. Should you pick up a loaf in the morning and press it to your cheek, you will feel tonight's breathing in it. All cities tell themselves what they are. This one says, I am a place where doing keeps company with being, where roofs hail rain as a colleague and thresholds understand that feet have different moods. It says, I am ordinary in the way air is ordinary. You do not notice me until you need me, and then you notice that I was doing my work all along. Within this ordinary, as unremarkable as good bread and as necessary, there is a craft that prefers not to be named. Ballads give it too many teeth. Play actors make it too quick. In plain life, it is neither beast nor lightning. It is housekeeping carried to its most patient conclusion. The mind kept tidy, the body kept civil, the hour kept company until it offers the right chair. If you wish for a word, choose the gentlest. Shadow worker, perhaps. A person who, when asked, does a small thing with great attention and leaves the room grateful to have been left as it was. No guildhall instructs them. No charter lists their dues. They are the misfiled, soldiers whose hands remember discipline but whose names fell off the roster, porters who learned the arguments doors make and found themselves agreeing with both sides, scribes whose wrists kept the speed of secrecy and discovered that speed, like water, seeks any channel. They pass among the city's trades the way mist passes among hedges, leaving wet that dries without remark. Their kit, if you emptied it on a table, would not impress a magistrate or a minstrel. A knife short as a palm, lighter than a boast, honed so often it believes it is a whisper. A length of cord that has more knots in its memory than on its fibers. A cloth square that could be a bandage, a pad for a bolt, a polite veil over a keyhole's curiosity. A stub of wax that minds its own business until asked to mind someone else's. A sliver of mirror the size of a thumbnail to let a corner confess without making a sound. Boots, not new, not noble, whose soles have learned which cobbles answer and which ignore questions. Clothing follows the grammar of corners. Nothing that glitters, nothing that insists. Wool the color of the street's shadow. A hood that looks like weather. A belt that keeps its buckle's opinions to itself. A good disguise is not a costume. It is a reason. A man in a porter's apron moves like weight has spoken to him for years. A woman in a novice's cloak remembers to let her steps choose the center of a flagstone because the edges have broken sermons to tell. A kitchen boy's hands stay busy even when his eyes must not. The city knows its own people. If you borrow one of them, you must be grateful in movement, not in words. They study not doors, but the moods of doors. A latch is a creature. Oil is a kindness it never forgets. Hinges like to be asked instead of compelled. And a hand that speaks please through its thumb finds answers faster. Does the keyhole exhale cool or warm? That tells a story about fire, and fire tells stories about people. Is the scuff on the threshold from shoes that hurry in after dark or boots that stomp out before dawn? There is a difference in the dust. These readings are not sorcery. They are the plain literacy of things. If you imagine some academy on a mountain, lamps, old beards, younger heads bent to copy wisdom, put it away. The school these people attend is built of seasons. Autumn explains how leaves tell the eye that motion matters more than color. You learn to stand still so well your cloak looks like an arrangement of wind. Winter teaches breath to stay inside wool, to warm itself on its way to the world rather than frost the night's opinion of you. Spring smells everything and therefore teaches you to carry your own weather. Onions for the kitchen door, soap for the laundry court, a memory of smoke for any room with saints. Summer writes footsteps in dust. Your feet learn to spell without leaving their name. Clients find them the way water finds a crack and coins find a pocket. By habit, by gravity, by need too old for pride. The exchange is never theatrical. It is a purse that wants to be half empty before it speaks. A name that never quite clears its throat. A request that insists it is smaller than the story that holds it. A letter mislaid, someone says. A latch reconsidered. A rumor returned to its cage. The city has many languages for not saying a thing too plainly. The shadow worker understands them all and answers, if answering is wise, in the dialect of time. Not now. Later, when steam rises from the baker's second batch. When the watchman whose knee clicks is given the gate nearest the mill. Payment is a geography more than a number. Silver serves when it can behave. When it cannot, other currencies gladly come to work. A turn of the guard that will be repeated next month if a certain bell rope is coaxed to fray. A skiff whose boatman remembers nothing between one quay and the next except the way the reeds leaned. A key that does not open but persuades a certain dog to think well of you. The promise that, on a particular morning, a cart piled with straw will be taller than a wall, and the gatekeeper will be listening to a story that makes him like his job again. Trust is a guest with places to be. It arrives, sits on the bench as if to stay, and then rises with an apologetic smile to catch the last light down the lane. No offense is taken. The craft sets an extra cup anyway. Names are folded small and carried in a pocket that is washed separately. Meetings choose rooms that notice new breath. Courtesy pays the rent. Even with those who will not be kind tomorrow, courtesy today is interest compounded in silence. The watch, good people doing the city's good work, are not enemies. They are metronomes. Their steps mark measures. The shadow worker dances in rests. One must know the joke the gatehouse tells at the third hour, the glance a pair of friends share when they cross near the Coopers, the place where a vigilant captain always stops because a certain cornice reminds him of a childhood window. This is not to mock a man. It is to share his rhythm and then step where his music is softest. Castles, with their ambitions arranged in stone, reward attention more than audacity. A ledger whispers about a postern used only when turnips arrive. A slate tile, newer than its neighbors, announces where a roof forgot who it was and had to be taught again. A change in mortar shade the length of a man's arm points to an old quarrel with a draft. Servants' paths draw maps you can only see if you stand still long enough to learn the foot's handwriting. No wall can be bullied the way it can be befriended. Superstition is weather. Argue with it and you will be wet. Work with it and you will be dry. In one parish, a quiet stranger brings luck to chickens. In another, he sours milk simply by walking past. If a tale begins that a man walks through stone, the remedy is daylight and errands. Bread, soap, a nod to a child with a ribbon, a compliment for a broom that has done its work. Fear is a field that grows what is planted in it. If you do not wish pumpkins, do not plant pumpkins. Grow beans of good mornings and beans of thank you, and the beans will climb trellises of normal. Failure, when it visits, travels as a neighbor, not an enemy. It borrows salt and returns a better kind. Plans are written on sand with a wetted fingertip. They are meant to be redrawn. If the hand shakes, let it. The city does not punish tremors. If the hour misfits, another hour tries its jacket on, and look, this one closes properly. Afterwards, one tidies. A chair chooses again the angle it remembers. A latch is soothed. A curtain hangs as if no one had ever taught it to confess. The aim is not victory. The aim is the courtesy of leaving the room with nothing to report. Success, that quietest friend, prefers an exit chosen yesterday. It does not want running. It wants stepping. It wants the cart that smells of hay because hay forgives everything. It wants the side gate that keeps mint in the cracks. It wants the boat that knows reeds by their first names. It does not want a skylined brag made of rooftops and breathlessness. It wants steam, loaf, cup, the company of people whose trade is to leave questions unasked not from fear but from expertise. Solitude is the usual companion, but it is not loneliness. It is the solitude a workshop enjoys after the tools have been wiped and set where they like to sleep. It is the solitude of a pew two from the back where one can see the door and hear the hymn and also the rain if the roof remembers a certain imperfection. There are friends, careful and few. A ferryman with a talent for forgetting faces in order to remember currents. A laundress who has never met an odd stain and therefore cannot be startled by one more. A clerk who knows every seal in the city by the way wax cools beneath a thumb and whose thumb has many temperatures. Meals are simple the way dawn is simple. Bread that fits the hand it was made for. A bowl that wants to be held. Onions that understand loyalty in winter. Apples that remind the mouth that sweetness and tartness are not enemies but old neighbors who share a fence. A little salt, a little soot, water that has been thanked. The body is instrument and house. It is polished and dusted, tuned and warmed. Boots are mended before they complain. Cloaks are brushed before weather asks them to work. Hands are washed not only of dirt but of hurry. When strangers imagine this craft, they make it sharp. In truth, it is round. They make it fast. In truth, it is measured. They make it loud inside the skull. In truth, it is a silence that likes to be invited to sit and will sit as long as you let it. It shares a great deal with weaving, the way the shuttle must learn the mood of the warp before it dares the crossing. It shares a great deal with gardening, the way a seed will keep its calendar even if you do not keep yours. It shares a great deal with baking, the way dough chooses when to rise, not the clock. Anonymity is the best tool in the kit and the easiest to misplace. Fame is heavy and leaks. A name is a roof that any rain can find. Better to be that someone than that one. Better to have the street say, "Did anyone pass?" And the street answer, "Yes, no, everyone, no one." At the end of a long road, perhaps there will be a stone without a word. The town will know anyway. It will keep the space a little warmer in winter and a little cooler in summer. That is plenty. Betrayal occurs the way autumn occurs. Expected, beautiful to the careless eye, but entirely made of endings. Clients are as faithful as their fear permits. Kindness happens. So does forgetting. The craft takes weather as weather. It sets aside a cloak, packs an extra loaf, keeps an ear for a rumor about a gate whose hinges are due for charity. It prefers to have 3 roads when only one is needed. It travels as one who may have to turn back for the sake of someone else's tomorrow. Some lives arrive in the village of afterward. There are chickens. They write their punctuation in the dust and are adored for it. Bees make their slow grammar in the air. Herbs learn the names of the hands that pinch them and thrive on being thanked. The person in the small house keeps the second pew forever and teaches the church door to love the sound of leaving when leaving is appropriate. On the table, a cord sleeps under the cloth, not because it will be needed but because it once was, and gratitude likes to seat old guests near the fire. The mind, which once counted hinges and heartbeats, counts now seedlings and clouds. It approves both tallies. Most, though, finish as they lived, tidily. A borrowed thing is returned a little better than it was. A debt is paid in the coin of, "I was expected to do this and did it 10 minutes sooner." A friend is told not the last truth but the useful one. A room is left easy for the next soul. The city takes the rest, breath, step, small kindnesses, folds them in with the others and calls the bundle ordinary. We should all be so honored. Listen, the baker's apprentice turns in sleep. He will rise in 2 hours to lay the first loaves against the oven's masonry and draw lines in flour that look like rivers the mapmaker forgot. The clerk sets his quill upright so it will not dream itself into a stain. A watchman, whose knee clicks and has clicked for years without complaint, stands a moment where the lane from the Coopers meets the lane from the Chandlers, and stares at nothing in particular with an affection that is not unlike prayer. In a narrow room above a stable, a woman who counts lambs to fall asleep counts now the breaths of a child and smiles because the number is steady. We may speak of tools again, if only to help the mind be quiet by thinking of small, manageable things. The knife, bone handle worn to the shape of a particular hand. Oilstone that has known the same circle of sharpening long enough to dream it at night. The cord, hemp, not too new. New rope tries to brag and tangles itself with opinions. The cloth, linen washed until it knows what softness is for. The wax, bees made it in good weather. It feeds the hinge rather than smothers it. The mirror chip, its edge blunted so it will report news without making blood of the messenger. Chalk for marks that rain can correct. Charcoal for marks that darkness corrects. A small auger no larger than a finger for wood that wishes gently to be asked to change its mind. Clothing again, for the body wears sentences. A porter's gate says, "Wait is a conversation between ground and shoulder. I am fluent." A monk's step says, "I apologize for interrupting air. I will be brief." A scullion's hands say, "I can carry heat from one room to another without spilling it." The city reads, always reading. You do not fool it with dye alone. You must offer it grammar. Patterns, too. Not plans, which make pride and then grief, but patterns, which make gratitude. How often does the bell in the South Tower ring true? Only a child counts exactly. A working person listens and knows when the ringing means the ringer is thinking of his grandmother. That is a useful minute. When does the fishmonger's cart arrive, not because of fish but because of news? Some mornings the river is news. Some mornings the cart is. Where does the sun fall on the yard at the hour the kitchen girls sit and tuck hair and laugh? That patch of warmth is a paragraph. You may read it or you may write in it for a moment if you are very polite. Even the city's animals collaborate. Dogs keep their own calendars. A friendly dog will gladly accept payment in scratches for introducing you to the stare that smells of meat at certain hours. Cats consider coin vulgar but will accept respect and will trade it for the kind of rumor only eaves that no birds can give. Horses, who hate drama, will tell you which handlers are careful and which are confident and how that difference matters to gaits. If there must be a word like poison, let us say instead recipe. The same leaf that eases pain when asked kindly will scold the heart if bullied. Seeds are arithmetic. A pinch, not a handful. Water that remembers the morning, not the cup that forgot it. Kitchens are safer than apothecaries because the apron knows the difference between seasoning and sin. If ever a bitter thing must be persuaded to do more than cook, a double blessing is said. One for those who will be spared the sharpness of steel, one for those who will be spared the sharpness of regret. And then doors are left unlocked for physicians. Letters are windows that wish to be doors. Seals believe in theater. Wax softens to a thumb's weather and takes its memory. A kettle in a quiet room will release steam in the shape of suspicion if the fire beneath it knows worry. Paper creases according to habit. A crease can be repeated with such loyalty that a note returns to its first fold as a pilgrim returns to the shrine that began their journey. The shadow worker touches these things as a librarian touches pages. 2 fingers, a breath, a promise made silently to leave the story readable. We will have a little history, but only the kind that lies down and becomes a pillow. In towns like this, there were always those who carried news between chambers not because they loved danger but because rooms do not speak to one another unless a person offers them a sentence. A well-run house depends upon 1,000 courtesies, half of them unseen. Servants are architects of motion. Their decisions are the hinges of days. Where those hinges creak, another set of hands sometimes helps the door decide to open or shut. Not heroes, housekeepers of fate, if fate is allowed such a humble word. And superstition again, soft as fog. A spoon left in a pot brings rain. A broom crossing a threshold invites a guest. A 3-knock pattern on a door makes luck sit up and pay attention. People love patterns because patterns love people. The craft uses this love without breaking it. If 3 knocks make a maid smile and lift the bar, better to knock thrice than to insist upon cleverness. Cleverness is a fair-weather friend. Courtesy goes out in any storm. There is a way to breathe that becomes a disguise. It does not hide the chest. It hides the hurry. A good breath says, "I have time. Therefore, the world has time for me." It is remarkable what doors trust a person who trusts time. Shoulders lower. Keys turn as if returning to a familiar room. Even a floorboard, famous for squeak, will forget itself if a foot offers it the dignity of a pause. We may speak of sleep, since it is what we are asking for and what the city is gifting us. Sleep loves ritual the way cats love windowsills. To call it, you do not whistle. You put the room in order and make the bed friend. A cup rinsed and placed where morning expects it. A cloak hung where it will remember how to be warm. A little water for the plant that watches the sill. Hands rubbed with the last of the day's bread to tell the palms that labor is finished. The lamp's wick pinched with wet fingers so it does not complain. Then the pillow is introduced to the cheek the way neighbors are introduced, by name, kindly, once, without repetition. Still the city speaks. A tile cools and notes it. A sparrow decides to be first and then decides against it. A lover's quarrel in a far street ends with the overspoken word, "Sorry." Pressed into a kiss the night refuses to witness. A drunk sings one line of a song the way a cracked bell rings. Bravely. His friend helps the melody home. In the infirmary, a nun counts breaths and persuades pain to loosen its grip by telling it the story of a saint, who once beat it in a fair race to a hilltop. Pain like stories in which it loses. It recognizes itself and behaves. We will let our shadow worker set down their bundle now. We will watch them wash in a basin whose water knows how to forgive. We will watch them fold each tool into cloth the way a grandmother folds a baby into a blanket. Not tightly, but with the understanding that corners comfort. We will see them sit on a stool and remove a pebble from a boot and thank the boot for carrying it without complaint. Gratitude is their truest armor. Metal is rude compared to it. Before the candle gives its small, agreeable sigh, a last inventory, for the mind likes lists when it has promised not to worry. Knife asleep, cord coiled, cloth clean, wax wrapped, mirror wrapped within the wax, chalk in the seam, charcoal in the other seam, auger in the spine of the pack, boots brushed, cloak shaken once and laid so it will remember, bread for morning within reach, water within reason, window barred with courtesy rather than fear, door told, you and I are friends, bed told, we both do our best. Now the city lowers its voice another note. The tower lamp winks because lamps like winking. The river remembers a joke it heard in spring and tells it to a piling. The piling laughs and bubbles where no one can hear. A cloud, late to its appointment with the moon, drifts across like an apology and is forgiven at once. Far away, far enough that it will arrive as a pleasant rumor and not a disturbance. An owl consults with the dark about the location of a mouse who has overscheduled himself. Advice is given. None of it will trouble us. In this piece, something else can be quietly set right. The reputation of those ballads call assassins. We have not used the word because it has too many sharp corners for a bed. Yet what people imagine, blades that brag, shadows that shout, hearts that hurry, is not what the night has shown us. The people who move gently through these lanes for the sake of errands that cannot be posted are more custodian than cutthroat. They remove splinters from the city's palm. They remind hinges of their manners. They teach ladders to be ladders only for a moment and then go back to being shadows. They do what is asked as if it were the mending of a hem, the putting back of a mislaid spoon, the straightening of a frame so it hangs not proud but true. Perhaps, only perhaps, once in a great while, a deed is done that should not have had to be asked of anyone. If so, let the night keep its veil. Our business is rest. Our business is the small correctness of things. The broom that will be where it belongs at dawn. The cup that will not startle a hand by being missing. The bolt that will slide quietly and then feel important. Storytellers in daylight may need sharper lines. Here we make them round. If there must be a prayer, and it is a fine hour for one, let it be not to a single saint but to the furniture of the world. To roofs. Keep rain from those who sleep beneath you, and accept the snow without drama. To floors, forgive the careless. Love the careful. Do not report them differently. To doors, prefer asking to telling. Prefer opening gently to slamming shut. To windows, be generous with mourning. To bread, be enough. To water, be what you are. To time, walk with us rather than ahead of us. If we lag, look back and smile. We can end part one here not with a flourish but with a fold. The city is tucked in. The shadow worker is breathing the kind of breath that does not argue. The watch steps past, counting the way a shepherd counts but with no worry in it. Lamps are out or nearly. The moon has taken the east roofline into its confidence. The river has decided not to say anything further until morning. Nothing has been conquered. Everything has been kept. When you wake, there will be the soft thump of bread on a counter, the murmur of early hooves, the first bright scold of a blackbird who believes dawn was late on purpose. But for now, turn your face toward the pillow's cool side, the one that remembers shade and welcome. Part 2 will be waiting in its own time, with other calm rooms and older, kinder histories, and with the same promise this one kept. That night can be a lullaby if we let ordinary things sing. Sleep, then. The city is on watch. The river is on watch. The roof is on watch. And the quiet craft, which is mostly courtesy under another name, has put out its lamp and taught its heart to rest. Dawn approaches the city with bare feet. so as not to wake the houses before it is time. It lays a pale cloth along the river, folds a corner of gold over the chapel spire, then waits in the courtyard behind the bakers for permission to enter fully. Permission is granted by the first door unbarred. Wood learns quickly each morning who means it well. The bar slides back with a sigh that has talked with iron all its life. Flour breathes from sacks. Fire clears its throat. And bread, which believes in schedules the way bells believe in echoes, rises to meet the hour. A shadow worker wakes at the texture of light rather than the clock of crows. A certain gray means the watch has traded corners. A certain pink means the night ferryman has tied off and is walking home with his shoulders thinking of stew. They sit on the bed's edge, let their feet find the two familiar boards that do not squeak, and thank the house for remembering them. Gratitude is an oil that keeps every gear from complaining. It is poured more often than lamp oil and spills less. Water in a basin greets skin like an old teacher, cool, honest, impartial. Hands learn again the small curriculum. Eyelids with care, temples with kindness, back of the neck with the serenity of a person smoothing a map. A towel finishes the lesson, adding warmth. To be clean is not to be shining. It is to have fewer arguments with the hour. Clothing today chooses modest grammar. A porter's apron for the morning, a carter's jacket rolled and tied beneath, a cap whose brim likes drizzle. Color is a rumor. Texture is a truth. The city reads texture. A man who has worn wool too long wears the memory of it even in linen. A woman whose sleeves once met soap at dawn keeps the clean, brisk motion of wringing even when her hands are empty. The shadow worker borrows these motions with permission. They do not mime. They participate. This makes all the difference. Breakfast is soft advice. Bread from last night's loaf, not the heel. Heels are for pocket comfort later. Dipped in weak beer that has made its apologies and turned itself into nourishment. Cheese listens without comment. An apple recalls the orchard and shows the knife where to be gentle. The window is opened a thumb's width so the room can remember birds. Outside, the lanes practice their lines for market. The half-holler of a coster testing her voice. The tinny rehearsal of a spoon against a pot. The leather whisper of harness renewed with fat. Curtains, lifted with 2 fingers, admit the small daylight to sleeping rooms and do not disturb the dreams it finds there. Dreams that need finishing are folded and left on pillows like letters to be answered at noon. Work begins not with movement but with stillness. The shadow worker sits and draws the city in their head. The spine of the river, the clutch of streets like fingers around a stone, the knuckles of gates and the nails of towers. They add the new, for the city has grown a freckle overnight. A scaffold at the south transept, a plank across a ditch where the mason's apprentice dropped his lunch and recovered his purpose, a puddle that has opinions about knees. They add the old, the be-loud garden where the brewer's wife forgives wasps, the porch where a loan was repaid in smiles and onions, the bench that listens to sailors. Maps, like friendships, improve with revision. A plan is consulted and then demoted. Plans are coaches, moments are players. It is wiser to coach well and then applaud than to climb onto the field wearing a whistle. The errand today is small and, because small, exacting. A seal must be read, not broken. A cupboard must decide to open at a particular hour. A bell rope must be found to be slightly shorter after noon than before, without causing a sermon. These are domestic operations conducted quietly in the house of the day. To carry this quiet from room to room, the shadow worker tucks 3 things into the heart's pocket. First, patience, the kind that lets a kettle sing its whole song before pouring. Second, kindness, the kind that straightens a chair one did not sit in. Third, discretion, not silence, which can be proud, but discretion, which is courteous and keeps confidences because confidences like to be kept. The city's guilds wake like instruments tuning. In the weaver's court, threads hum scales between pegs. At the smithy, the anvil states its single, convincing argument and is answered by iron that sees the point. Carpenters stretch chalk lines that do not wish to be straight and are persuaded gently. The scribe's quarter opens shutters onto shelves of perfect impatience. Parchment that wants to be written upon so badly it almost writes itself. Ink in wells is as moody as weather. It likes to be stirred with the sound a bee makes. The shadow worker visits these places the way a gardener visits beds. They do not pull weeds that belong to someone else. They notice that the cooper's apprentice knots his apron twice, that the glazier's wife keeps a pot of thyme in the sun for cuts that have not happened yet, that the bell founder says a blessing backward when the bronze cools because backward blessings please metal. These are not secrets. They are local weather reports. A life is lived better when one knows whether to carry a shawl to a conversation. There is a language to be learned in every trade. In the yard where carts are shod, wheelwright talk has many words for round, and none of them are the same as the words the baker uses for rise. The laundress has 5 ways to say clean, and 3 of them leave room for sorrow. The rivermen speak of water's opinions. Calm as a cat, thin as a blade, sulking, ambitious, forgetful, asleep. The shadow worker collects these words not to use them later in boasting, but to stack them like dry wood where a winter story might need them. At mid-morning, a pewterer's door opens because doors love to open when pewter is warm. Inside, a tray is cast with edges that curl like a leaf resigned to autumn. The master is discussing the difference between shine and dignity with his son. The difference is not obvious to youth. The shadow worker admires the tray as one admires a cloud that is about to rain on the right field. They purchase a spoon of no consequence. The spoon wishes to be kind to soup. It will be. Money does not change hands exactly. It passes from responsibility to responsibility and nods to both. Down the lane, the locksmith shop is a school for curiosity. Keys hang like herbs, drying their mysteries. Locks sit open on the bench, their innards politely available to be inspected by those who know what they are seeing and hidden by those who do not. The locksmith is a mild woman whose fingers were born with spectacles. She shows the shadow worker a new warding that obliges a key to bow left before bowing right. It is not obstinacy. It is choreography. They discuss springs. Springs are little tempers. Treat them well and they restrain themselves. Treat them rudely and they gossip to your thumb. Across the street, a parchmenter scrapes a skin with the concentration of someone explaining the world to a child. The world listens. So does the skin. You can hear the listening in the rhythm of the blade. Patience is the softest sound an edge can make. In the corner, a jar of pumice waits. Pumice is an impatient tutor. It rushes. The parchmenter uses it only when the moon is full. Why? Because that is how his own master taught him, and lunar superstition does no harm to paper and sometimes does good to people. The shadow worker approves of traditions that keep hands gentle. On the square, a small commotion, no bigger than a sparrow's quarrel with a puddle, alerts the air. 2 carts have entered the same intention at once. Words are rearranged until they mean solution. The mule that had been consulted incorrectly is consulted correctly. The carts pass. Citizens release the breaths they were not holding. The square congratulates itself on being good at this. It is. At noon, the bell keeps everyone honest. It is less a command than a reminder of an appointment with bread. The shadow worker eats wherever the stove invites them. Today, in a yard where horses dream with their eyes open, a pot holds the long conversation of cabbage, onion, a heel of ham that has decided to be generous, and barley that remembers the field even after boiling. Bread accompanies like a cordial uncle, warm, humorous, uninterested in argument. A child near the gate practices whistling and manages only air. The child is told that air is where every whistle begins. This pleases air most of all. Midday is also for letters. Not the grand, ribboned letters that plan to be admired. Those travel in litters and enjoy attention. Midday is for short notes folded with the care a mother gives a scarf, sealed with beeswax that smells faintly of meadow, delivered by feet that know how to look unimportant. Seals matter. Wax is a mood. The signet is its grammar. Pressed too hot, wax sulks and smears. Too cool, it fractures like an insult. The perfect seal is a quiet handshake that both parties understand and neither discusses later. The shadow worker visits the stationer not to buy but to learn the news that paper tells without ink. A nib chewed by thought, a quire thinned by nerves, a penknife left where an apology would be. These are tiny telegrams from households whose names never need be spoken. The stationer, who has never been in any room where drama occurs, knows nonetheless where drama prefers to sit, by windows, near doorways, across tables, on thresholds, and sells ink that dries fast for rooms with too many thresholds. There is also the matter of candles. Every errand touches wax. Tallow is loyal and honest and smells of work. Beeswax is elegant, literate, and smells of memory. Bayberry wishes to be special and is. The shadow worker keeps stubs of each, for stubs are the most willing kind of candle. A beeswax stub warmed in a palm will do a hinge good. A tallow stub persuades a stubborn cord to accept a knot and be dignified about it. Bayberry, reserved for winter, comforts the soul of a room that has had too much rain inside it. Up on the cathedral's scaffolds, masons speak to stone in syllables the wind repeats. Plumb lines dream of perfect gravity and nearly achieve it. A master mason, who has built towers out of patience and the steady disbelief in collapse, explains to an apprentice that mortar is a marriage hypothesis. Sand and lime agree to hold each other. If they learn to agree more, the wall stands. If they quarrel, a saint falls and breaks his nose. The apprentice nods as if he understands. He will understand in winter, when frost offers its critical review. The shadow worker has reason to descend into the undercity, where drains explain how persistence becomes cleanliness. They carry a lantern whose horn panes turn flame into a milk of light. Water down here is serious. It does not gossip. It carries away what is too heavy for sorrow and makes room for what returns. Rats comment, but politely. Brick remembers the hands that set it and holds their fingerprints in damp. The shadow worker taps a wall with a knuckle and hears the vowel of hollow. Not tonight, they think. Some hollows mean later. Some mean never. Some mean now. This one is a later. Later is a neighborhood with good families. Afternoon gives the streets a warm hand on the shoulder. Business relaxes into conversations about nothing that will matter tomorrow and therefore matters very much today. Laces are retied. Caps are tipped. A fishmonger explains to a cat that morality is a sliding scale, and the cat, untroubled by scales of any sort, blinks twice, which is the correct number of blinks for forgiveness. The watch changes shifts. Their boots recognize the cobbles as colleagues rather than furniture. The shadow worker greets them like weather. Acknowledged, respected, not challenged. Disguises are not costumes. They are agreements with sight. To look like a porter, carry the weight of a porter's day in your shoulders without grimacing. To look like a novice, let wonder run ahead of you to check the way. To look like a messenger, make speed comfortable for the people you pass. Do not rattle their air as if you were a storm. It is possible to go unnoticed by going exactly the speed the city expects. The trick is to learn the city's heartbeat in every quarter. The fast trot of the tanner's alley, the languid stroll of the lace sellers, the dignified pace of the notary street where even ink dries with ceremony. The shadow worker learns alleys by their light. Morning alleys, afternoon alleys, alleys that pretend to be evening even at noon. Some love fog and draw it in like shawls. Some resent rain and splash even when dry. Some remember markets that no longer exist and smell of fruit in months when fruit is a rumor. Knowing alleys by light is like knowing people by laughter. You see who they are more truly than by any measurement. Sometimes an errand asks for heights. Roofs, like cats, are forgiving if approached with compliments. Slates do not want to be stepped on by ignorance. Lead wishes for feet that respect its softness. The shadow worker walks the crown of a lane, remembering that gravity is generous up to a point and then becomes an accountant. Chimneys announce stories. This one smokes because soup forgave a mistake. That one rests because the old man downstairs fell asleep instead of boiling water for tea. A third gives off no smoke because a widow is practicing thrift and, more than thrift, resilience. A skylight wears dust written with tiny paw prints. If a home keeps cats, it keeps secrets and does it kindly. Dissent is an art more praised in poetry than practiced in life. Ladders are honest. Ropes are opinionated. Stacked barrels are gossiping stairways that enjoy the problem of feet. The shadow worker shoulders the day as one shoulders a cloak that has learned the shape of the wearer and reaches ground like a sentence that knows how to stop. Toward evening, the city rehearses night. Children are called home with names that will later be used as endearments or as spells against rashness. Pot lids lift and put down plumes that cats read with interest. Water is carried upstairs with the old rhythm that passes for song. Above an inn-yard, laundry prays to dry and is told by the breeze that grace will be given shortly. The shadow worker has business with ink again. A clerk whose patience is long and whose ledger is exact wears spectacles that deliver calm to any room. She knows that a number is a promise, not a boast. Her abacus clicks without hurry. The shadow worker, asking after the manner of somnambulists who do not wish to wake furniture, learns what must be learned. That a particular bill will be presented at a particular hour and that its amount contains 2 extra digits justified by a story that will not hold water even out of respect for the storyteller. This is enough. The truth does not need to be pulled up by the roots to be recognized as truth. Outside, the watch oil their lamp hooks. Oil likes being useful, it tells hinges so. The lamps are lit one by one, and each lamplight makes an island of time in which late errands can dock. The shadow worker visits the baker's door to return the promise they borrowed at dawn. The promise that the day will be civil if the first smell is good. A few coins, a nod, a roll that still wears the oven's accent. Bread in the pocket makes a body humble. There are worse protections. There is also a stop in the small chapel of St. Hedwig, patroness of skirts that do not trip their wearers. The statue is plain wood. Its face is the face that wood makes when it has been touched by grief and by hands together. The shadow worker lights a stub of bayberry and does not pray for success, which is impolite. They pray for steadiness, which saints enjoy providing. A bell at the back door rings the way a spoon rings a pot when someone has discovered that onions forgive the cutting if the knife is clean. The chapel smells of wax, old song, and the good damp that roof beams perspire in spring. Night takes the city in small, careful bites like a child learning to love soup. Windows accept dark as a shawl. Dogs edit their field of concern down to 1 or 2 corners they can control with policies. The river resigns itself to reflected lanterns and does not argue with them. Somewhere a flute tries a phrase and gives it back to silence. Somewhere a book closes and teaches its page the art of patience. The shadow worker climbs stairs they have climbed before, to a room that remembers their sleep and keeps it like an herb in a jar. Let us speak, while lamps are brave and voices have put on soft slippers, about the ethics of a craft whose reputation the daylight loves to bruise. Not a sermon, only a small arrangement of thoughts like spoons in a drawer. There is a difference between harm and interruption. A window unlatched so a breeze may get its way is an interruption. A pane broken so it will never again keep out rain is harm. The craft learns to be a breeze. There is a difference between secret and privacy. Secrets infect. Privacy heals. Secrets demand to be handled. Privacy asks to be honored. The craft prefers privacy and treats secrets with the tongs one uses for coals. Payment can be silver. Often it is not. Often it is a change in the placement of a table so that a widow will not bump her hip. Often it is a dog called away from a fight. Often it is a rumor returned to the river from which it was fished, while still wet. Often it is nothing at all that a bystander could point to, but in the heart there is a weight lifted that lets breath go further before needing to turn around. Betrayal exists as mildew exists, sour, inevitable where damp is unattended. The craft does not rage at mildew. It opens the window, scrubs the sill, moves the plant to a sunnier shelf, and remembers with no ceremony which pot it was. That is all. Ceremony is for weddings and for bread. Sometimes a request arrives with sharp teeth hidden in its wool. Sometimes the wool is a finer deception than the teeth. The craft learns to hear hunger in a voice. There is hunger that can be fed, hunger for justice, hunger for safety, hunger for quiet. There is hunger that feeds on feeding, the hunger of cruelty, the hungers of pride. The craft lays down its tools when the second hunger enters the room. It is not refusal. It is obedience to an older contract with sleep and with morning, which are the employers of decent people. Night deepens, and with it the city's love for ordinary sounds. A bowl stacked on another bowl produces the note patience. A gate closed with care produces the note promise. In a garret, 2 students argue the best word for a thing the language has not yet named. and then, defeated, eat cheese. The city approves. In a cellar, a barrel burps after the fashion of a happy infant. The cooper swears softly at the angel's share and smiles, because he has known angels and knows they pay in other coins. We are permitted now to look at equipment laid out on a table, because everything that will happen tonight has already been decided. We are touring a museum whose exhibits sometimes leave the glass case and spend an hour in the world before returning when no one was watching. Here are gloves that are not black glints, they are the brown of work. Their seams are stitched with thread that enjoys the phrase, pull your weight. Here is a coil of line whose twine knows how to keep a secret without strangling it. Here are 3 keys. One is too heavy for a door. It is for starting conversations with a certain type of lock that believes in intimidation. One is bone, a toy key fit for a diary or a childhood. It opens nothing important, and therefore it opens all sorts of things adults overlook. The third is not a key at all but a set of teeth cut into a strip of tin. Pressed into wax, it remembers, and remembering, it instructs a smith who is owed a favor. Here is the knife again. It has come to listen. It is not a knife for making a point. It is a knife for making a circle in wax, for whittling a wedge to quiet a window, for cutting bread in lines that reassure a stomach. Its edge is the edge of a composed reply. Its sheath smells faintly of bay leaves. Bay leaves keep steel from believing rust's predictions. Here is chalk for doors that need permission, charcoal for doors that need sympathy. Here is a small file that sings under breath and removes pride from metal until the metal fits into the life other metal is leading. Here is a pouch of crumbs. Crumbs are ambassadors to dogs. Here is a mitten with 2 fingers only, the better to threaten no one and yet hold a rope. Here is a vial that has no poison in it, only vinegar. Vinegar is honesty in liquid form, wakes locks from sleep, and tells a room that someone careful has come to tidy. There is also a book. Contains no words. Its pages are wax tablets, and on them the stylus draws diagrams like lullabies, this stair and then that landing, this gate and then that turn, the measure of 8 steps between an echo and its answer. When the night is over, the stylus warms above a candle and smooths the wax, and the book returns to blankness the way the tide returns to beach. We may step, for a moment, into weather, so the mind can enjoy the sound of its coat. Fog is expected before dawn tomorrow. The river has written a letter to the air and promised gifts. Fog shows a kind face to all trades that prefer not to be counted. It turns distances into guesses and guesses into courtesies. A watchman, seeing fog, shortens his beat so he may pass the same lamp twice and exchange opinions. Cats, seeing fog, sit where the world is smallest and feel like owners of a kingdom. The shadow worker, seeing fog, rearranges the morning's errands in a way that makes the day feel intelligent. Rain, when it comes, lays coins on the street till it is rich with small silver. People walk like collectors, picking their path so they do not spend too much. Roofs applaud rain. Gutters take minutes. Barrels practice holding. The shadow worker carries a cap that accepts water cheerfully and a strip of oiled cloth for papers that have not learned to swim. Rain hides tears and highlights laughter. A window is no business of the sky, but the sky does not mind borrowing it. Snow, when it dares this latitude, tutors the city in softness. Footsteps write poems. Wheels write prose. Dogs add punctuation that the eye edits kindly. The craft has a rule on snow days. Errands grow shorter and compassion grows longer. People who never greet each other greet. Doors like to be shut gently so snow can think well of them. The shadow worker keeps a pinch of sand in a pocket. Gift for a stair that forgot how slippery it could be. In winter, even risk wears mittens. Wind is a meeting that chose to stand rather than sit. Tidies, then untidies, then laughs. It makes a cloak behave like an opinion, large and sometimes wrong. The shadow worker takes alleys that punish wind for boasting and speaks to hats in the language of pins. If the night is too loud, work waits. The city is not a contest to be won but a friend to be consulted. Friends make room for weather. Midnight pays its debt to silence in full. This is the hour when even the boldest mouse becomes a theologian and listens for meaning in crumbs. The shadow worker returns to their room the way the tide returns to a rocket likes. There is washing of hands that have touched dust and should be thanked for keeping their appointments. There is setting aside of tools that have done no harm and have therefore done great good. There is the ceremony of boots, which hate to be left upright and love to sleep on their sides like tired fish. If ever there were numbers to reckon, now is not the time to reckon them. Arithmetic is for noon. Midnight prefers poetry, even the poor, practical poetry of lists. The list tonight is short. Hinges remembered their manners. A letter began in one place and continued in another without anyone knowing the difference. A latch persuaded made a sound like agreement. No one's sleep was asked to share its pillow with fear. This is abundance. This is harvest. This is what the craft calls a day. A last look from the window. The tower lamp continues its promise. Beyond, the hill is a dark shoulder with a single star pinned to it by accident and perfectly on purpose. Somewhere a fox writes its cursive in soft earth. Somewhere a goose criticizes the moon, and the moon forgives the goose for being a goose. Somewhere a guard sits because kneeling is for prayer and lying down is for fools. Sitting is for professionals. Somewhere a midwife warms her hands by telling them a joke. Somewhere, far as the ear can afford, a bell tolls none of our business. Sleep now comes from under the bed, where it has been waiting like a careful cat, and leaps lightly onto the coverlet. It chooses the place by the heart. It kneads, purrs, and the mind becomes butter. The body, which has been polite all day, accepts politeness in return. The lamp thinks better of itself and goes out. Morning will bring other work, the kind that wears sunlight. There will be a market festival in 3 days. Booths will be raised. Ribbons will be learned by air. A juggler will drop nothing and be properly unadmired for it. A puppet will tell the truth and be cheered. Festivals require as much shadowcraft as nights do. Knots and ropes that do not trip, hooks that do not fail, a purse returned to a pocket before the pocket knows it was empty, a lost child escorted to the smell of cinnamon where mothers come to forgive the world. There will also be a ship from upriver, carrying casks that thump like optimistic hearts. The customs clerk will take his pencil from behind his ear and break it with a sigh. The shadow worker will have a pencil that has never been behind an ear, because pencils like to be kept clean, and will offer it without charge. The clerk will forget to ask for a favor later. The craft did not offer the pencil for a favor. The world, nonetheless, is now steadier by a sliver of graphite. And there will be a visit to the apothecary, whose jars keep the seasons alphabetized. He will explain again, to anyone who listens, that foxglove is a clock for a heart that has lost its watch, that valerian comforts furniture as well as people, that vinegar cures pride faster than it cures anything else. The shadow worker will buy rosemary for remembrance of small lessons. Do not overestimate a latch, never underestimate a broom. Fold paper along the line it chooses for itself. Stand aside for grief. Stand firm for the child who does not yet know where to stand. But that is for later. The pillow has accepted tonight's head. The door has accepted tonight's trust. The street has accepted tonight's feet. The river has accepted tonight's moon. The roof has accepted tonight's weather. The city has accepted tonight's oath. To be kind, to be ordinary, to keep the kind of secrets that are really just careful forms of love. If you wake in the dark, as some kind souls do, don't count the hours. Count the honest things. The breaths between the towers' slow blinks. The spaces in the watchman's footfall. The little glass-tongued clicks the window makes as would tells glass a brief story about expansion, and both agree to nod and think of other things. If worry insists on sitting at the foot of the bed, give it a crust of bread and tell it the rain barrel is full. Worry, fed, falls asleep. You may then pull the night up to your chin and let the corners settle. Morning in the winter country did not break. It unfolded. Darkness lifted as if someone far away pulled back a heavy curtain, and what remained was a pale blue hush that made every roof and hedge look slightly more delicate than they had the night before. The frost that had come on quietly while the village slept had settled its thin glitter over everything, on low stone walls furred with moss, on the hard ruts of the lane, along the edges of the millstream where reeds nodded and held their icy lace. The air itself felt newly washed, pared down to its purest edges, so clear that even the smallest sounds traveled farther than they had any right to do. a distant latch lifting, the discreet cough of a cow in a byre, a single early footstep. In the narrow room above the inn's common hall, the shadow worker lay a while before rising, simply listening to the house's small language. The beams above gave their occasional soft groan as they settled into the cold. Somewhere below, a log shifted and a faint shower of ash tapped the iron dogs of the hearth. No voices yet. The innkeeper's wife would be waking the fire with practiced hands. The baker who rented the side oven would be checking his dough. The boy who helped in the yard would be stepping quietly out to see whether the pump had frozen. It was a kind of clock, all of it, one that told the hour by habit rather than number. When getting up could be delayed no longer, the travelers swung their feet to the boards and found them solid cold, bright with stored night. The jug on the washstand wore a film of ice fine as glass. The crack as a fingertip broke it ran like lightning. Water brought up while the embers were still brave had kept a whisper of warmth deeper down, enough to take the edge from the shock when hands and face met it. There was power in such cold, as if it gathered the mind to a point and warned it gently to be awake. Layer by layer the armor for the day went on. First the plain linen shirt, faintly rough and smelling of lye and smoke. Then woolen hose, the good kind that clung without pinching, pulled up carefully and smoothed at the knee. A tunic followed, dense, undyed wool whose color lay somewhere between the backs of sheep and weathered oak. The belt tightened it all into a single garment, and at the belt hung the little knife that could pare a quill, slice a crust, cut a cord. Boots came last. Well-soled, blackened with tallow until they looked almost like wet bark. A heavy cloak, hood deep enough to shade the face if wind came up along the lane, settled on the shoulders like a promise. Down the stair, the day widened. The common room still held the night's breath, but the low fire was awake now, and the first curl of steam lifted from a pot where barley had been set to swell. The innkeeper's wife, apron already dusted with flour, set down a trencher with a heel of coarse bread and a shallow bowl of porridge ribboned with honey. There was a small mug of ale beside it, and a soft half-smile that needed no words. Eating in silence was a winter custom as much as a courtesy. Morning speech belonged to those who had been up in the dark since midnight, coaxing ovens or calving cows. It returned to everyone else a little later, when feet were warmer and shoulders looser. Outside, the lane bore the light step of frost without protest. The village made itself visible one detail at a time. Smoke climbed from a single chimney as straight as a plumb line. The dovecot on the far side of the square gave up one gray bird, then another, shy as thoughts. A rooster sounded his opinion and received two reluctant answers, as if the day were a weight that had to be lifted by agreement. The shadow worker stood a moment on the threshold, drawing slow, shallow breaths the way winter people do, warming the air in the small chamber of the mouth before giving it to the lungs. The first path was a familiar one, bending gently downhill to the mill. Water ran even in this hard weather slower, speaking in a lower voice, but obedient still to its path where men had guided it. The wheel took the current on its paddles and converted it into that patient heavy movement which was more like breathing than turning. The mill stones, inside, kept their own conversation, a low rumble that changed slightly with the dampness of the grain. In the doorway stood the miller, his hair and shoulders powdered with flour like early snow. He lifted a hand without pausing the knot he was tying and used the other to wipe a sleeve across his brow, though the room was chill enough to fog breath. Work heated the body wherever the weather failed. The world beyond the mill widened into pasture. Sheep stooped to the pale blades of grass, their noses dusted white from their own exhalations. The shepherd, staff grounded, watched the sky the way a sailor watches the line of the sea. A dog sat at his heel with that neat, contained energy particular to good dogs, eyes bright, ears keen to orders that had not yet been given. There were a few words shared about the week to come. Wind to turn north by 12th night perhaps. Snow if it curved east. A crusting of ice that would please no one. Weather talk here was not quite prophecy and not quite history. It lived in the thin space between, where human experience and patient observation met. The forge could always be found by ear. Iron declared itself when struck. It announced the shape being urged from it. The blacksmith's hammer no more hurried than the millstones, and each strike followed by a breath, A listening, a small correction of wrist or grip. Sparks lifted and died almost before they had begun, brief as the life of shooting stars. The apprentice on the bellows kept his rhythm. Inflate, pause, release, and watch the heart of the coals bloom from red to yellow to white, then back again. The smell of the place was a square smell. Coal, hot iron, wet leather, singed oak. Outside on the rack, a winter's assortment of work waited within hand's reach. A plowshare to be mended, nails in a farrier's neat bundle, hinges that would not bend a door out of true. Beyond the forge lay the cooper's yard, where curves were the order of the day. Oak staves in their stacked arcs looked like the ribs of some old beast lying sun-bleached on a shore. The cooper eased them into iron hoops with the confidence of long acquaintance, coaxing wood towards wood until the line between them disappeared. His wife dealt in quiet perfection at a lower table with smaller circles. Flagons, pails, a butter tub, and the little shush of sanded edges made a kind, domestic sound. Finished casks stood by the shed with their winter breath rising faintly from within. Wood, when joined so, made its own weather. By mid-morning, the square had shrugged itself into activity. Because it was winter, the wares were close to the earth. Knob-bled carrots with their last dusting of soil. Cabbages that kept tight counsel with themselves. Onions plaited in ropes that swung a fraction when the wind remembered to move. A fishmonger had his barrel of eels that wrote slow gray words in the water, and a rack of smoked fish that perfumed the air with the thought of summer. There were bowls and jugs set out by the potter, their glaze telling you about the heat that had made them. There was wool in hanks and wool in cloth and wool wrapped in a woman's hands as she knit, the needles ticking like distant rain. There were toys made with the kind of kindness that knows childhood will scuff them and love them the more. A blunt-limbed wooden horse, a rattle with bells that had only one sound to give and gave it gladly. In the corner where the market's noise stepped back a little sat the scribe. He wrote at a slant, in a hand both firm and considerate, shaping letters into promises. People came for letters to cousins gone to service, to sons with a merchant on the coast, to a widow's sister in the next county who still knew the earliest songs. Words had weight here and distance. They needed a hand to carry them, and the scribe lent his carefully. The bell of the church told noon in 5 beats, and then, after a breath, 5 more. Sound moved through the cold like water, filling space rather than slicing it. Men and women turned quite naturally toward food, as birds turn toward air. The inn's common room had warmed to that particular degree where cheeks flush and hands go soft. The soup was a winter comfort, cabbage and barley and a morsel of pork that offered more taste than substance. Bread came in thick slices with a crust that asked for teeth and a crumb that forgave them. Talk was soft, neither secretive nor showy. A wash of local weather, fence rails, a child that had put both feet into the scalding tub and got out faster than steam. When the bowl had emptied and the bones felt ready, the traveler took the path by the river toward the ferry. The ferryman sat on his reversed bucket, a man shaped by seasons and current, his hands quietly busy with a coil of rope bent in patient half-hitches. He nodded past the shadow worker to the sky above the trees and said that it would be gray by evening, which meant the fire that night wanted banking just so. And he showed with his hands the way he laid the big coals on their sides like sleeping cattle and tucked ash over them as if blessing. Those who live with one element tend to understand another. Water taught him air and both of them taught him fire. The river went about its winter business. The silver skin at the edges kept up by reed and willow, the dark weight in the middle taking its depth seriously. Ducks had found their favorite cove and marked it with their anonymous little wakes. A heron stood to the knee in cold and thought tall thoughts. On the far bank, a small spinney of alder caught the day's light and half restored it to the water, as if there were a quiet agreement between them to keep winter from being altogether about absence. The path turned into the wood almost without asking permission. Pine laid down its scent every winter and retrieved it each spring as if nothing had been used. Needles patted the ground into soft conversation. Frost hung longer in hollows where sun seldom remembered the way, and the shadows leaned at the particular angle that belongs to December. Once, between the trees, a fox moved smoothly as if thought had grown 4 legs. It looked back only to confirm what it already knew, that everything behind it was too slow, and went away with its tail held just so, the way a fox's pen writes its name. Returning toward the village in the mid-afternoon, the day had altered without boasting about it. The in-breath of morning had become the slow exhale of evening. The blacksmith's hammer had lengthened its pauses. The mill's wheel strode more soberly, as if its feet were heavier. In the square, the potter's glazes had dulled a shade. The fishmonger had stacked his smoked fillets in tidy retreat. The scribe had poured his last pinch of sand and closed his tin. The baker's boy, red-eared and satisfied, carried a tray of loaves close to his chest the way a priest carries something entrusted. The smell of stewing meat began its friendly trespass along the lanes. Inside the inn, lamps were lit with a spill from the hearth, and their light went up like the first line of a chant. Shadows climbed the ceiling boards and settled there like nesting birds. The benches filled with the particular variety of tired that winter gives. A clean tired, one that leaves room for laughter to find a seat. A fiddler took his place by the practical alcove where drafts could not irritate the strings. He tuned without grandeur, then laced together a tune that had as much to do with walking as with music. Boots thumped in a restrained way. A laugh was held just long enough to keep it from startling the glassware. Someone told the old story again because the old stories fit winter better than new ones. The evening meal preferred to be simple. A dish of peas that had been dried while the last geese flew south. A marrow bone given time enough in the pot to surrender all its wisdom. Onions that had been told a gentle truth in a pan until they softened their hearts. There was a pie made of yesterday and the day before that. Scraps of meat, a few carrots, a very little gravy, and a lid of dough that made the thrift look like generosity. Small beer went around like a quiet river. No one hurried the drinking or the talk, because hurrying in winter is like taking a short breath when the air is already thin. The shadow worker, settled where the fire's warmth arrived in a polite wave rather than a rush, gave most of their attention to listening and a little to the play of sparks behind the grate. The talk moved in steady loops, weather first because weather is the oldest neighbor. Fences and gates after because the living keep turning up their questions. Then families, but gently, without prying. Names were not story hooks here. They were simply good places to hang a hat. Later, upstairs, the room had gathered its cool again. A fresh, clean cold that belonged more to linen than to stone. Boots were set neatly by the chest, cloak folded into its own weight. The shutters left a thumb's width gap where the world could send in its small report. A hint of star, a breath of river, the brief far-off note of an owl that had measured its night and found it in order. The straw within the mattress had been turned not long ago. It sighed when it accepted the body like an old friend saying, "There you are." Winter sleep is made of such things, a sum of small accommodations, each undertaken in kindness. In the night, the house spoke a little again. The embers in the common room confessed themselves and then fell quiet. The wind remembered the lane and walked it once, briefly, as if to check the doors were properly barred. Somewhere a horse shifted its weight with the slight jingle of a ring. The hours themselves seemed to lie down in rows like sheep, each one following the one before it simply because that is what hours do in a well-ordered village. Morning returned by the same route it had taken away. The first thing was not light but less dark. The second was the tiniest softening at the edge of the shutters. The third was the willingness of the fire below to respond to a breath. The jug on the washstand offered its small challenge again. The mind, having already accepted winter once, accepted it once more. The hands woke to their work of lacing and buckling and smoothing and tying. The door opened, and breath made its gentle cloud. This day, because there is always more to notice when winter allows, the steps turned toward the church and then past it toward the tithe barn. The church stood with its low tower and its roof pitched steeply against snow that sometimes came and sometimes only considered coming. Inside, it smelled of stone that knew fire only as a distant rumor. The pews polished by centuries of ordinary sorrow and ordinary gratitude. The windows holding thin glass like a skim of ice. The altar cloth mended and mended until the mending itself became the pattern. A candle had been lit early by someone who liked to set the day inside a blessing. The flame stood without moving, small and sufficient. At the tithe barn, quantity became a kind of quiet. Great stacks of sheaves slept under the watch of braces as thick as a man's thigh. The breath of grain had a calm sweetness in it. like a well-kept promise. A man with a tally stick made his mark slowly, not because he was slow, but because the marks were for winter and winter asked for care. Above, high in the dark, a pair of doves had chosen the one beam where the draft never quite reached. They nested in the good dust and kept a tiny summer. The lane to the weaver's cottage was rutted and careful with ice. Inside the small room, the loom took up more space than its size. It was the center around which the rest of living arranged itself. The weaver's feet were the first music. Treadle, shift, treadle, and the shuttle's passage between warp and weft was the second. Cloth grew exactly as bread did, by patience and proportion and a knowledge at the fingertips. A length of undyed will lay folded like cloudbank. Another, dyed with madder and onion skins into a quiet russet, rested on a chest where lavender had been tucked against moths. Winter dressed itself in colors that could be mended. At the next turning, the tanner's yard made its own kind of sense. In summer, it told the nose what it thought, loudly and without diplomacy. In winter, it minded itself more politely. The vats were covered, the hides raised and lowered by a pair of men whose arms had grown argument-proof. Tools hung along a beam as if sleeping upright. The tanner's wife, who kept the books, squared the slate and added a tick to a customer's name with a stub of chalk that had already served 3 schoolchildren and the scribe's youngest. Industry's manners here were plain but not unkind. By the brook that came in from the east lay a cluster of willow pollards. Their heads cut every few years, so they sprouted a great tuft of straight, usable rods. They stood like patient saints in a winter procession. A basket maker had a little shelter there made from the things he bent. Willow and hazel woven into a wall that turned wind and admitted light. He did not look up when the traveler stepped into the margin of his world. His hands worked on, convincing a rim to sit well, persuading uprights to consent to a curve. A line of baskets stood to one side, the deep kind for root vegetables, the shallow for eggs, the one with the little lid that kept herbs from wandering. Some crafts talk. This one hummed. Toward noon, the weather did as the ferryman had predicted. It went gray without malice and settled there with all the comfort of wool. The square seemed to grow slightly closer to itself, stalls drawn in a fraction, voices a shade softer. The bell called 12 again, and the world responded by becoming warm from the inside out. The inn gave beans cooked with bay. It offered a heel of the good cheese saved for days when the heir wanted someone to bargain with it. It ladled a broth that tasted a little of onion and a little of a bone that had done its work as thoroughly as a saint. Tankards stood close to hands. Mittens steamed on the hearth fender, turned from time to time like hedgehogs in their sleep. Afternoon was given to the long road out toward the far pasture. Winter opens distances as summer closes them. A bare hedge shows fields the eye never sees in June. The steps went steady along the lane, past a gate blocked cleverly with a single loop of old rope and a stone, past a stile that made the knee remember itself, past a place where in spring cowslips warm the bank and in winter the bank simply waits. A boy came by with a sack of something that was heavier than he wanted it to be and greeted with the full seriousness of his errand. A girl behind him held a twig like a scepter and declared herself queen of the ditch. The ditch, being an experienced subject, accepted politely. At the furthest barn, a man mended a rake by the door where light was best. He had a piece of sacking with small tools in it, awl, whittling knife, a nail or two that had straightened themselves after service elsewhere. His cap sat on his head with the same propriety that the awl sat in his hand. He did the kind of work that winter likes best, unhurried and sure. Beyond him, a cow leaned over the half-door and examined the weather with grave attention. Cows carry their own summers. Even in January they keep an afternoon in their gaze. The return came earlier than the outward going, because evening had been pulling on a thread since noon. Lamps woke in the inn again. The same seats were taken by the same people with the same ease. A piper came along with the fiddler tonight and set a low drone underneath everything that made the room feel differently anchored. Someone had mended a stool so cleverly that you could no longer tell which leg had offended. The talk was about a sow that would farrow any day now, and about a letter that had come with a little seal pressed with a ship, and how that meant the cousin truly was in a port where ships meant more than fields. The winter allows gossip only if it is kind. This was kind. Supper, if anything, was simpler than dinner. a trencher with a little salt, a little butter made golden by a remembered summer's cow parsley, a plate of sliced apples that had kept their sweetness well in straw, a pan of chestnuts that popped once in a while in a friendly way. Somewhere someone produced a pot of ale warmed with a clove. It went around without ownership. People find themselves owners of things in spring and borrowers of them in winter. It is one of the season's best manners. Night rose without argument. Boots found pegs. Dogs found the warmest places without instruction. The traveler went up the stair again that had learned a footfall and did not creak. The bed welcomed, and the blankets, and the sense that beyond the shutter the sky was carrying on the old work of holding stars in their places. A candle snub sent a little smoke into the room and then into nothing. The dark relaxed around the sleeping body like the inside of a folded cloak. If there was a dream, it was of bread loaves laid out in a line that was also a road that was also a winter river shining and still. In the dream, one did not choose between them. One simply walked along the loaves and arrived by water at a door that already knew one's name. Another day began because winter, too, has a calendar it obeys. The jug on the washstand behaved itself. The bread at breakfast had a different crumb, and that told you which field it came from last August. Outside, the lane held the exact number of new footprints required to prove that the village kept its promises while you slept. A man mended a roof with small upright bundles of thatch set carefully like the strokes in a neat hand. He moved with the deliberation of someone for whom falling would be a story he did not want told. Below, a boy watched with all his heart and learned with all his eyes. Much of the village's education happened this way. The day was given, this time, to the monastery a short walk beyond the last hedge. It sat with its back to a small hill as if sheltering against it and faced south for the same reason cats face windows. The gate was plain. A brother at the porter's lodge extended the same welcome. He must have extended to traders, to pilgrims, to a woman once who brought eggs but stayed to hear a psalm and found that winter eased a little after. In the cloister walk, the air felt several degrees kinder than in the lane. Stones keep their own weather and share it with those who know how to step inside. In the scriptorium, time learned a different habit. The light fell long from windows placed with a mason's memory of the sun's path, and it made the pigments on a palette look like small glazed fruits. Quills lay trimmed and ready, their points resting on a line of wool as soft as cloud. A brother in spectacles had his head bent over a page where a capital letter grew into a garden of tiny leaves. The quiet was so whole that when a page turned it sounded like a bird taking off from a still pond. Ink gave its small breath of iron to the air. Words formed their old procession, slow enough to be read aloud by a careful heart. Elsewhere in the house, cheese sat on shelves in a room that knew exactly how moist it meant to be. Two wheels were turned at the moment that kept them from devotion to gravity. The monk who turned them had hands like loaves left in the oven 5 minutes longer than others, hard at the outside, strong and warm within. In the orchard, trees formed their winter grammar. Trunk, bough, twig, bud. The path between was beaten into a sentence anyone could read. A robin wrote its own footnotes in the margin and then flew away with the pen still in its mouth. A bell rang for the noon office, and the sound, familiar as bread, gathered men the way a well gathers water. The traveler did not enter the choir but stood within earshot, listening while the voices folded and unfolded like blankets smoothed on a bed. Words said for centuries adjust the space they occupy. The air in the chapel had been used for prayer so often it had taken on the shape of it. When the office ended, footsteps made a kind noise on the worn flags, and the day continued with nothing much having changed and everything having been made slightly better. The walk back to the village went by a different path, because winter encourages variety in small things when the larger ones remain constant. A hedgehog had left a little track as brave as any knight's. On a broad gate a wren stood and told the world what news there was, which was simply that wrens still existed and were in good voice. A woman passed with a basket and a pace that acknowledged winter's demands and winter's patience. The nod exchanged meant all that needed meaning. The final light gathered itself early and used the clouds as a way to multiply. The square accepted it gratefully, the way a tired person accepts a shawl. The inn, now as familiar as a favorite psalm, opened itself again. The piper took up yesterday's drone as if night had not intervened. Children were allowed to sit awake a little longer because learning to listen is as important as learning to read. Someone sang the old lullaby about the mare that walks the boundaries of sleep. Another joined soft as wool. The song did not demand tears and did not forbid them. And so to bed once more, with the knowledge that winter had kept faith and would again, that the mill would speak tomorrow, and the forge and the river, and the small, honorable work of the hand. The shutter was set not quite tight, so the night could bring its cool blessing into the room and carry out the warm worries. The blanket gathered shoulders, and the day turned over like a well-banked ember, from flame to glow, from glow to the soft knowledge that heat continues under ash. Sleep followed in that old, slow way, with no sharp corners, only patient edges, as if it too were a craft passed down among winter folk. The art of lying still and letting the world keep you. Night in the village eased down with the same unhurried care a careful hand uses to cover bread with a cloth. The last color withdrew from the lane. The hedges kept only their shapes. The stream beyond the mill settled into a tone you felt more than heard. Inside the inn the hearth took on its night duty voice. Less show, more steadiness. And the banked embers glowed like a cluster of small, reliable thoughts. People finished their cups, tied cloaks, exchanged brief goodnights that owed as much to shared work as to affection, and stepped out into a darkness that was not empty so much as complete. Above the houses, stars took their appointed places with a seriousness that had nothing to do with worry. The sky in winter does this. It behaves as if it were freshly made each evening, cleaned of smoke and settled air, laid out for inspection. Dogs turned in their chosen hollows, 3 circles and a sigh. Cats did the same, but as if the idea were theirs. Latches found their rests. Shutters offered their narrow kindness of wood between cheek and weather. Somewhere in the byre a calf lay its head along its mother's flank, learning the shape of warmth that is older than fire. The shadow worker slept the way winter people sleep, deeply, not from indulgence but as payment for daylight. You learn, after a time, to lie with a shoulder the mattress likes. You learn where your feet end and where the blanket begins. And you learn that a well-banked fire is a companion who does not need you but will be there if you wake. In the small hours the inside, the way timber will, giving back to the frosted air the heat it took all day to hold. The clock, handmade in a town 3 days away, coughed its way toward another hour and found it, and the village turned from one side to the other in its sleep. Before morning, someone was already up. Bakers always are. There is a hush particular to kitchens before dawn, the silence of flour deciding to be bread. You could hear it if you knew how. The slap of dough on wood, the softball thud of the rising bucket set down on flags, the whisk, whisk, whisk of a brush laying flour into the little cracks a hand cannot reach. The baker's lad, red-knuckled and solemn with importance, made the first trip to the pump and returned with a slosh and a stagger, proud of every drop he did not lose to the step. The oven, still warm from yesterday's last load, accepted the first sticks like a creature choosing not to be woken rudely. Flame followed, a patient ribbon, then a rush when the bundle caught. Heat arranged itself in the belly of brick, and the day had begun where so many days begin, in the practice of patience. The traveler, careful to give credit to the season with quiet breath and slow hands, rose when the room decided to be not dark. The jug on the washstand still wore its film of ice, and the crack of it under finger was again that quick winter lightning. Linen was cold then bearable, wool was a friend as ever. The cloak, shaken once to wake the nap and once more to send out yesterday's stray crumbs of snow, lay on shoulders the way a good answer sits in the mind. Simply, completely, with no need to prove itself further. Outdoors, the lane was a firm book whose pages had been pressed flat by the night. Each footprint from evening had admired itself briefly in the moon and then softened. The new ones for morning would be a fresh sentence written by fresh boots. The mills will turned as if measuring hours, not grain. The ferryman's rope, stiff as an old decree, lay in great, disciplined coils along the keel. He would flex it later with the slow authority of a man who knows both knots and words. Some winter mornings begin with a house, some with a field, some with a task. This one began with sound. From the church's low tower came the thin, Dear note of the little bell the clerk used on weekdays when the bigger one would have been prideful. Its call gathered 4 or 5 early souls as a small candle gathers moths, and the short prayer that followed was a practical blessing. No gilded phrasing, only the old words set right way up so the day could stand on them. Outside again, the cold had cheered itself, remembering breath. Faces looked newly washed, even those with soot the forge had kindly tried to lend. This day held work in pieces, each one with its own quiet. Behind the inn, where the wind passed by as a gentleman and did not pry, women had set up the things that turned fiber into clothing. On the bench lay combs for teasing wool. Their teeth were set as precisely as the teeth in the head of a good saw. Nearby stood a pair of carders, their surfaces bristling like gentle hedgehogs. A child, told not to test them with a finger, believed and did not. Rolags gathered along the lap of a spinner like little winter clouds. The spindle, tiny weight of wood and whirl, weighed truth into the twist. Turning fleece into thread is an act of long kindness, the kind winter respects. Nothing in the process is hurried if you want the thread to be itself. The weaver, for his part, had set the loom for a length of undyed cloth that would take mordant kindly and accept color later when fields remembered flowers. The warp went on with a cat-scare patience. Over this beam, under that rod, through this lease, between those horns, until order had been made out of many. The shuttle moved in winter rhythm. Steady, 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 pause to settle, steady again. Cloth grew with the calm of white breath in white air. Near the green, another winter craft went forward with fewer witnesses but the same devotion. Candle making in the buttery where cold gave steadiness to the hand. Tallow was melted carefully with rosemary and bay to make the kitchen lamps smell less fiercely of their own origins. Beeswax, spared for the best table and the church, had its own honeyed breath that put summer into the room for a moment and then stepped back. Wicks were twisted from hemp, dipped 60 times with patience that felt like prayer. Lines of new candles hung in ranks, pale soldiers who would never march, only burn faithfully and disappear by doing their duty. At the cooper's yard, the day's cold made oak speak clearly. Staves soaked in the brook had become more biddable. Iron hoops, heated to a color quietly dangerous, slid down and drew wood inward until the barrel remembered it was a single thing. The cooper's mallet encouraged without bullying. The chime of a good strike went into the air and came back as assurance. A little steam climbed where hot metal met winter flesh of wood, no drama, only the day thinking aloud. At the forge the blacksmith took advantage of the keen air to harden a set of chisels he had been promising for a month. Steel glows honestly in winter. You can read the colors even under an overcast sky. Straw, brown, purple, blue, and therefore you can strike true. His apprentice, patient as a second hand, kept the bellows in that fine middle ground between zeal and sloth. The shoeing stool waited. A farmer brought a horse and said without complaint that the beast had thrown a shoe on rutted ice because the ruts had been made by someone else's cart. Winter asks us to forgive each other a little more. Beyond the last house, the lane went narrow and the hedges close, and there the hedger himself worked, laying a new length with a billhook that cut and did not spoil. To lay a hedge is to persuade each stem to accept a bend that is not quite a break. You lay it toward its neighbor, you stake it, you bind it with a rod, and in spring it answers with growth in the right directions. When summer comes, birds will build there with a confidence that belongs to places made by both hand and season. Today, while breath smoked and sleeves grew crisp with the day's little crystals, the hedger hummed a tune everyone knew but could not name. He lined up thorn with thorn and created a fence that was a thicket and a shelter and a promise in one. The pond at the far meadow had taken to itself a lid. 2 men went out with a frame saw and cut handsome squares from the ice, sliding them up a plank to a sledge whose runners sang a clear note on packed snow. The blocks were stowed in the ice house, stone and thatch and the cleverness of layers, each square given to a bed of straw as if it were a sleeping guest. This was not luxury. This was winter's trick for summer, a favor done early to be redeemed in August when butter sulks and fish forget themselves. In March the door would be wedged and left. But today the work made the breath come strong and the cheeks come red and the talk come a little rough with pleasure. Toward midday the bells 5 and 5 voice gathered again the mild obediences that make life here so resilient. The inn set out a stew with pearl barley and onions. It had taken the morning to persuade, and now it offered its agreement to the spoon. There were pickled beet slices shining like small winter suns. There was a crock of mustard waiting to teach the tongue to waken. Spoons met bowls with a decent noise. Benches made their understated creak. The room accepted dusk in the corners, though it was far from evening. After dinner, because winter afternoons are good teachers, the traveler climbed the small hill past the churchyard to the charcoal burn where the colliers had built their mild, smoking earth. A clamp, they called it. A heap of billets raised into a cone around a central flue, then hooded with turf and sprinkled earth, left to smolder without flame until wood forgot it had been tree and remembered it could be coal. The collier tended with a stick and an eye and a patience that does not occur in summer. He watched the breath of the mound as a doctor watches a chest. Too much wind, and it would flare and become ash. Too little, and it would sulk and become nothing. The smoke rose in a thin blue column that reminded the air how to stand. The collier said that in March he would break the clamp and bag the shining rounds, and everyone would say it had been easy, as they always did. From the charcoal place the view set out the whole parish under a thin glaze. Every field a white page edged with ink-black hedges. Every spinney a thumbprint. Every roof a neatly folded letter. See long enough and you begin to know which roofs breathe faster, and therefore which families include babies, which chimneys burn wood, livelier smoke, and which peat, slower, darker, older, which byres keeps cows and which keeps horses just by the shape of the pathways trampled in front. Winter tells secrets no other season can be bothered to carry, and they are always the sort of secrets you already half knew. Down the slope again with the slow step that spares the knee, the traveler came upon a small, ordinary mercy. A woman had set a bucket of warm water in the shade, and beside it a folded rag and a note of chalk on a slate, saying, "For hands, for anyone." Winter is a province of clean disgust. It asks you to see dirt and to refuse it without drama. Men and women coming away from the hedge, from the coal, from the yard dipped fingers and palms, rubbed briskly, blew into their own cupped hands like smiths stoking, and went on, their work rising a fraction in ease because of that bucket. No one thanked aloud. The chalk had done the talking. At the far edge of the village, where the lane turned from houses to the archaeology of old hedgebanks, the roadmender had chosen a hollow lea to sort flints. He sat with a little hammer that had a difference in its head you would not notice unless your own hand had felt it. He split stones by looking, not by striking. He laid them by sizes as neat as prayer beads. A cart's iron rim makes plans with winter. The mender and his stones make counterplans. In time, when thaw becomes mud and mud becomes ruts deep as oaths, his neat piles will do the work of keeping wheels speaking politely to the lane, and the parish will feel grateful without finding time to say so. Evening came early like a quiet visitor who knows the household and lets himself in. The market took itself down in the soft order that leaves the square readier for tomorrow than it was for this morning. The scribe corked his ink with a tiny twist. His last letter would be sanded at home, where a candle could be spared. The fiddler had a string to change, but no hurry to change it. He hummed the part where the string would live and found that humming was almost as good. The inn's fire, sensing its hour, stood taller and implied without boasting that it had saved you a place. Today the pottage had a guest of honor. Carrots that had decided sweetness was what they had to offer the world, and the bread, baked early, had been set near the back of the hearth and now came to the table with a crust that sounded like a knocked door and a crumb that fell like blessing. The talk was winter talk, news trimmed of its leaves. A cow had calved and all was well. A girl had lost a mitten and found it again where the dog had meant to keep it safe under straw. A letter from the coast reported nothing but weather and a sale of salt fish to a captain who promised to pass by in spring with cloth the color of the inside of a pear. Promises in winter are neither binding nor idle. They are a light hung in a place where you mean to return. Later still, the older men took to their pipes and their cards not to contest anything but to measure the night's width. A story went round about how once the pond had frozen so completely that the parson walked across reading the Psalms aloud because he did not trust his feet. Another story followed which corrected the first gently without scolding. Children learned again that grown people can disagree without harm. It is a winter lesson. Outside, a little snow began with the private carefulness of a skilled scribe beginning a formal hand. One flake, then its mate, then a sentence. Sleep picked people off one by one without offense. The traveler climbed to the little room and found the straw in the mattress had made the same nest it had made yesterday and meant to keep making until spring asked for change. The shutters were pinned. The small space between them let in exactly enough knowledge for a dream. The knowledge that snow was writing its own handwriting on the lane and the yard roofs, and that in the morning the village would wake to a new layer of agreeing silence. Dawn came like the unrolling of a cloth that had been kept in a chest. When the latch lifted, the world lay under a neat inch of white, crisp along every edge, generous over every lack. Footsteps made themselves, one after the other, and each was the inverse of a star. The mill wore a cap. The inn's slate shoulders shone. The hedge along the path toward the tithe barn had turned to soft sculpture. People with brooms and wattle rakes appeared, not to defeat the snow but to make it useful, sweeping it from thresholds into troughs for animals, clearing it from lanes to the side where children would later use it to build the kind of fort that exists purely as an excuse to laugh. Snowlight changes work. It makes small rooms brighter merely by being outside. It makes iron rings sharper. It makes the breath of cows look like they are telling secrets to each other. Under this light, the winter skills that hide in corners step forward. The menders of gloves with antler needles. The lacers of boots who can coax a stiff thong through 3 turns without cracking. The smith's wife who knows how to soften a hardened heel by warming it between 2 bricks and telling it kindly what it is for. The apothecary's shelf looks ceremonial, glass and earthen and pewter shining, and the herbs in the bundles show off their summer colors while their winter scents stand closer. Thyme sharp, lavender honest, mint remembering heat. On this snow day, the traveler spent an hour with the apothecary, which is to say with 3 centuries of neighborly medicine. There was comfrey root sliced and dried, to be made into a poultice for a knee that objected to ladders. There was horehound for chest and cough, and a mixture of honey and vinegar that liked to pretend it had invented comfort. There was goose grease ready for chilblains and elderberries dried, as if for beads that would be reheated gently into a cordial for the kind of tired that does not announce itself politely. Nothing on the shelf promised miracles. Each jar promised the kind of help that might not be noticed until one day you realized you had not had to think about your throat for a week. In the yard behind, there hung a ham the smokehouse had been educating since St. Martin's Day. The smoke had not been allowed to strut. It had been given time to teach. Alongside hung strings of sausages whose seasoning had been argued over and agreed to. The argument will begin again next year, and so will the agreement. Hooks waited for eels the ferryman would bring when the river permitted. A tall boy with shoulders waiting to happen turned a wheel that cut oats for the small creatures who share winter with us and earn their keep by eating the things we spill. Past noon, the snow did what winter often does. It thought about deepening and then changed its mind. The clouds thinned just enough to let it be gray in 2 shades instead of 1. That light, the light that is neither generous nor mean, is the light many crafts prefer. The tanner found his traces easier to follow. The joiner saw the shy fracture in a board where in summer glare he might have missed it. The scribe at the corner table could work without candle and so spare the wick for a night that would want it. Mid-afternoon brought the one errand that always makes winter look suddenly ancient. Gathering ash. The innkeeper's wife sifted the ash barrel with care not to lose the charcoal that could take a new start and carefully stored the fine ash in a wooden bin. Ash is soap waiting to be. It is polish. It is the thing you throw on a spill to teach a floor not to be treacherous. It is the powder that makes ice lose face on a doorstep just enough to let a boot know what it is doing. Snow and ash together. Both soft, both honest. Remind the mind that winter's plain colors hide resources everywhere. At the far field, the shepherd showed the traveler the kind of skill you cannot explain, only do reading sheep. He did not lean heavily on his staff. He leaned lightly, as if the staff were leaning on him. He looked not at the flock but as if past it, and somehow counted without counting. He could tell, by the way 6 backs moved, that the 7th had chosen prickly thoughts and would require the dog. The dog, who knew the work as well as the man, went not by shout but by hand. A finger flick, a palm turned, a shoulder dipped, each small conversation answered with precision. A ewe with an old scar along her flank stood a little apart and looked at the traveler, then lowered her head and considered something satisfying in the snow. In winter, animals keep their counsel and their peace. It is a thing worth learning. Walking back, the lane's ruts had been sponged by the afternoon's small softness. Two boys had made a sliding place and were working out, by experiment and laughter, the principles of angle and speed. A grandmother in the doorway watched with one eye and pretended to knit with the other. She had a pocket full of dried apple rings and made one disappear now and then to keep the cold from entering by the mouth. The blackbird on the elder bush wrote his opinion of the day and ended with a flourish. A crow overhead disagreed and ended without one. Both were correct. By the third evening you could feel how winter settles into the bones, not as a weight but as a rule. Expect less variety, expect more depth. Supper in the inn honored the rule. It brought forward a dish from another hearth, a salt cod with onions and bay leaves in oil, the oil saved for holy days but used now because mercy is a kind of holiness. It brought a pudding of suet and crumbs and preserved peel, sliced shamelessly thick. It brought a pot of beer warmed at the edge of the grate until it learned to be gentle. Conversation moved slowly along the bench and back again. The piper set a hum across which the fiddler walked as if he were crossing a narrow bridge very well made. A baby slept. A man who had been sad for a week found that he could smile without breaking anything. Night folded once more. Wind came up the lane and then, as if it had entered a church, softened. Stars did their forget-me-not work. Somewhere a door placed its shoulder against its jamb with the quiet of an old friend leaning in. Upstairs, straw remembered hips and shoulders and found them again. Sleep did not need to be invited. It was already in the room, putting away the day's tools with careful hands. Another morning, and with it another set of small honors paid to the season. The jug behaved itself again. The boots, though stiff at the ankle, were willing. Outside, the world had kept its promise to remain winter. The traveler took a route that had been admired but not yet walked, by the dike where once men cut peat in older years when wood was scarce. The cuts lay now like narrow ponds, each with a skin that had taken the night's signature. Teal had found them, little ducks content with small, plain places, and paddled stolidly as if to demonstrate the idea of enough. In a spinney of holly and ash, women from 3 houses had made themselves a traveling workshop. They mended what feeds mending. Nets, aprons, the strap of a pack, the shoulder of a shirt. One of them had a bundle of rushes, green last summer, dry now, and she plaited them into mats that would go down along bed edges to persuade bare feet to be brave. Another had the pleasant job of taking an old cloak apart to make 2 smaller ones. She unpicked without sighing, and her pile of threads looked like a jar of cloud. They talked, but it was the half-talk of winter hands, broken into by the counting of stitches, the measuring against a knee, the listening for children who were playing without breaking anything vital. At the edge of their camp, a little pot of something savory sat in embers, and once in a while one of them gave it a stir with the absent-minded expertise of someone who has done 2 things at once all her life. Near noon, the traveler happened upon a thing that made winter feel like a library with a new book. A peddler had come by. His cart wheels hissed in the fine snow. The horse wore bells because bells encourage cheerfulness in animals and men. He had ribbon no one strictly needed and would buy anyway, and needles everyone needed and would say they could not afford and then afford, and pins wrapped in little paper folds, and a length of tape the exact shade of doves. He had tin whistles that made only 2 notes and therefore could not lead anyone into mischief. He had a piece of blue cloth the price of which made the air sharp. He had 6 tales he would tell in pieces so that they would last him to the next village, and each tale contained exactly the right amount of danger to entertain and none to disturb sleep once told. He drank his mug of small ale near the inn door and warmed his hands against it and went on, leaving the lane thinking better of itself for an hour. There is always a day in deep winter when the church's candle stores are counted, and this was that day. The verger, small, neat, exact, laid them out on a table that had seen 100 christenings and 100 wakings from. He tallied long ones for the feast days, short ones for the ferial offices, stump ends to be melted and recast, and he sighed with satisfaction that the numbers added to numbers the parson's book could love. Numbers in winter are not only about coin, they are about keeping track of light itself. Afternoon, that loyal companion, returned with its clear-headed modesty. The traveler took a seat by the scribe's bench. Today he was copying a passage for a farmer whose daughter wanted a few verses to keep under her pillow until wit. The scribe's letters stood like small winter trees, upright, well-balanced, no leaves to make them gossip. He sharpened his quill not with irritation but with affection, as a shepherd trims a nail from a hoof. Each word entered the page as if crossing a threshold. Sand came afterward and sat briefly like a guest, then rose and took its leave, having made things firm. Near the green, the bell founder from the town had come to talk repairs to the little weekday bell, whose voice had acquired a wobble. He handled it with the respect of a man greeting another craftsman. Bells, like people, make better music if attended to with loyalty and restraint. He struck it with a padded stick and listened with his jaw, his ear, his wrists. He nodded. A chip on the lip, a hairline in the waist. Nothing you would see unless you spoke bell. He wrapped it with wool and canvas, set it in a cradle, and promised a week. In winter, a promised week is a firm bridge across a fast stream. You step on and you trust. Evening walked the village again as if it had keys to every door, and of course it did. This night the inn served a dish with barley you could count and mushrooms from the wood dried in the heat of last August and soaked back into their old shapes with care. It tasted of patience and of the clever secret that water remembers what it has touched. Someone produced a small wheel of cheese from a house beyond the brook. It had been turned daily for 50 days and wanted to be shared because that is what cheese wants at the end of its careful life. The piper let the drone go and rested his elbows. The fiddler tuned down to a soft nest where lullabies like to sit. Before bed, the traveler stepped outside once more, because winter nights make a person wish to renew their treaty with the world. The cold took the inside of the nose and signed its name there. The stars wrote legibly. In a yard beyond the hedge, a woman shook a small rug and beat from it the day's crumbs of hay, the dog's 2 hairs, the child's enthusiasm. She hung it and patted it as if it were a friend. A man returned from the far field with a lantern whose horn sides made circles on the lane. He had the face of someone who had met no one remarkable and was glad of it. The inn's latch lifted with a good sound, and the traveler went up to a bed that had learned every curve a body can make and approved them all. The last morning of our winter keeping rose not brilliantly but bravely. The frost came back to take a final imprint of the place, the way a careful scribe takes a fair copy after the draft is done. The river breathed its slow steam like a horse that has worked and is not sorry. The lane was a ledger ready to be filled again with human arithmetic. The bootsteps of the baker, the neat paw prints of the inn dog, the sharper chevrons where a magpie had not believed itself quite a bird for a few minutes. There were tasks to complete because winter prefers endings to be as tidy as beginnings. The ash from last night's fire went across the doorstep and made it safe for the elderly aunt from the last cottage. The scuttle underneath the stairs was filled so that no one would find it empty at the hour when the mind is more tired than the hands. The bucket in the buttery was left with 2 inches of water, not 1, because 2 inches meant the air would not forget to be humid and the flower would be happier. Each small care had come from another winter, and would go on to teach another in its turn. The traveler walked each familiar piece of the village once more, not as a tourist mapping marvels, but as a friend telling the mind where to keep things. The hedges, tidy and persuasive. The mill, steady in its wet patience. The smithy, with its floor tattooed in centuries of spark. The cooper's yard, smelling of oak and iron and the comfort that comes of turning many into one. The church, modest and excellent, its bell gone to be healed and therefore its silence saying that healing was underway. The ferry, with its rope already thawing itself a little where palms would hold it later. The field where sheep kept the discipline of appetite and the generous indifference that belongs to sheep in winter. The monastery path, where the brother at the lodge lifted 2 fingers in a salute that meant both peace and you're late for nothing. At the last, the inn's common room gathered everything that matters in a winter village and laid it out without display. Bread on a board, with a knife set there as if it had been resting its whole life for this moment. A pot on the hob whose lid lifted a little to release a thread of scent you could follow with your eyes shut to its exact name. Leeks and a bone. A jug of small beer thinking warm thoughts by the hearth. Mittens drying in company. Boots standing politely. A child with a wooden horse making it go at the same speed for a very long time. Someone mending a net with hands that never stab themselves because they have become friends with the needle. Someone else reading one page of one book with all the attention a saint gives to one word of one prayer. Not because the page was rare, but because attention is the soul's winter blanket. The shadow worker, who had arrived with a list of ways the cold might crush a life and now carried a longer list of ways people teach the cold to be a teacher rather than a tyrant, sat for a while and watched the fire think. The embers were small planets. The iron bars were a horizon. Ash was weather and would be again. When the time came to go, no one made it dramatic. Cloak, hood, gloves. A nod to the innkeeper, who understood that "thank you" had been said all week in bowls scrubbed and wood carried and floors swept. A nod to the boy in the yard, who understood that grown travelers come and go and boys become men and winters turn into other winters until they do not. A nod to the lane, which understood everything and asked for nothing. Outside, the day had drawn itself into a clean, spare line. Traces of snow kept their counsel under hedge shade. Roofs wore white right along their ridges like a breath held and then let go. The road out of the village looked exactly as a road out should look in winter. Unhurried, narrow where the hawthorn leaned, a little wider where the west wind had dropped less. The first steps away made the only sound there was to make in such a moment. A gentle crush, a soft release, a rhythm that was half walking and half greeting. As the traveler turned once, as one always does, to look back, the village held still for the look and then, as if agreeing to be remembered correctly, moved again. Somewhere a door opened. Somewhere a voice said a name the way winter says it, clearly, without scolding. Smoke went up in a stitch and became a seam and then a garment. A flock turned exactly together, and not because anyone had told them to. The dog made a line, and then the shepherd made none, and together they possessed the field. The inn sign, a weathered board with a painted animal that had lost most of its color but none of its dignity, teetered slightly and then held. And so the road accepted the traveler as roads will. Behind, the winter village continued the old work with the old grace, mending and baking, tending and keeping, counting and forgiving, sleeping and waking, warming and being warmed. Ahead, more fields, more hedges, more honest frost. The same useful stars to travel by. The same small, good names for things you can carry in the mouth and not drop. Loaf, latch, hearth, bell, lamb, lane, hand. There is no drum roll at the end of a winter story well told. There is only breath in cold air, making it steady cloud. There is the weight of wool on shoulders. There is the sense that darkness will be met not with defiance but with 1,000 little agreements. Ash on steps, wicks trimmed, embers banked, doors set just so. A bucket left where it will do the most good. A ladle hung where a hand, waking in the night, could find it without fear. The village remains where it is, keeping faith with its own weather. The road moves on, keeping faith with those who walk. And winter, which arrived with a teacher's face and will depart the same way, stays a while longer, entirely itself to the last. Calm, exact, generous with quiet, stubborn for safety, honest about limits, lavish with stars. Under its tutelage, the mind goes soft-spoken and the body learns thrift, and sleep, old practical sleep, comes like the surest craft of all, laid down by hand with care, plank by plank, until even the wind nods and says that the house will stand the night. So let the screen go dark. Let the fire, in your hearing, reduce itself to small work and run no more to extravagance. Let the village we have walked continue, unwitnessed, to do what it does best. Prepare, preserve, practice, and praise. And if you wake in the deep part of the night and listen, you will hear it still. The far hush of the mill, the brief cough of the cow, the easy turn of a page somewhere, the little ash settling in a grate. All of it winter's last music, all of it enough.